Have you ever wondered, my dears, how well we truly know the people we share our lives with? How many faces does a person wear before we finally see the one hidden beneath all the masks? I've spent the last 40 years pondering these questions, and I'll tell you sometimes the answers are more terrifying than the questions themselves. They say trust is the foundation of any marriage, but what happens when that foundation is built on sand? When everything you believed, every memory you cherished, every moment you treasured turns out to be nothing more than an elaborate performance? Well, my dears, that's exactly what happened to me, and the truth. The truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. My name is Margaret. I'm 76 years old. This story happened in 1979. Before I continue, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Let me take you back to Millbrook, a small town in Yorkshire where everyone knew everyone's business, or so we thought. It was 1975 when my story really began, though I didn't know it at the time. I was 31 years old, married to Thomas Whitmore for 12 years, and we had 3 beautiful children: Sarah, who was 14, James, who was 11, and little Emma, just 8 years old. Thomas was the town's most respected accountant, handling the finances for nearly every business on High Street. You know, back then, being an accountant meant something. It meant you were trustworthy, reliable, the keeper of secrets and numbers. People would stop him on the street just to shake his hand. Thomas, they'd say, "You're the man who keeps this town running." And he'd smile that charming smile of his, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and say something modest about just doing his job. We lived in a lovely stone cottage on Willow Lane, the kind with roses climbing up the front and a red door that I'd painted myself. Every Sunday, we'd walk together to St. Michael's Church, the children in their pressed clothes, Thomas in his navy suit, and me in my Sunday best. Father Benedict would greet us at the door, his warm Irish accent making even the gloomiest Yorkshire morning feel brighter. The Whitmore family, he'd say, the very picture of devotion. Our life was, well, it was perfect, my dears, or at least, that's what I believed. Thomas would leave for work at 8 o'clock sharp each morning, his leather briefcase in hand, smelling of Old Spice and the Brill cream he used to slick back his dark hair. I'd kiss him goodbye at the door, watch him walk down our garden path, and feel grateful, so grateful. I worked part-time at the local library, shelving books and helping children find stories to lose themselves in. In the evenings, we'd have dinner together, proper dinners, mind you, with roast chicken on Sundays and shepherd's pie on Wednesdays. Thomas would help Sarah with her mathematics homework while I read bedtime stories to Emma, and James would practice his violin in the sitting room. Looking back now, I can see how carefully constructed it all was, like a stage set, perfectly arranged, every prop in its place. But at the time, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. The first sign appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in March of 1979. I remember it was Tuesday because that was the day I always did the washing. I was sorting through Thomas's shirts, checking the pockets before putting them in the machine. You know how men are, always leaving receipts and coins in their pockets. That's when I found the lipstick dot. It was a Revlon shade, Love That Red, still in its silver case. I stood there in our laundry room, holding it in my hand, the March rain pattering against the window. For a moment, I thought perhaps I'd left it there by mistake, though I never wore red lipstick. I was more of a pale pink woman, something subtle for the library. But I pushed the thought away, my dears. I pushed it away and told myself Thomas must have been holding it for a colleague, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. The second sign came a month later. Thomas started working late, sometimes not coming home until 9 or 10 at night. Tax season, he'd say, kissing my forehead and heading straight for the shower. You know how demanding the clients get this time of year. And I believed him, because why wouldn't I? For 12 years, he'd been a devoted husband, a loving father. What reason did I have to doubt? But then there were the phone calls. They'd come at odd hours during dinner, late at night, early in the morning. Thomas would rush to answer, speaking in low tones, then hang up and say it was work emergency or a client in crisis. Once, I picked up the extension in our bedroom to make a call and heard breathing on the other end. When I said hello, the line went dead. Thomas, I asked one evening as we lay in bed, is everything all right at work? You seem distracted. He rolled over to face me, and even in the darkness, I could see something flash across his face. Guilt, fear, but then he smiled and pulled me close. Everything's fine, Maggie. Just stressed about the Henderson account. Nothing for you to worry your pretty head about. You know, my dears, that phrase should have been my biggest warning. Don't worry your pretty head, as if I was too simple to understand, too fragile to handle the truth. The third sign was the money. I'd gone to withdraw £20 from our joint account in June to buy new school shoes for Emma. And James, the cashier, Mrs. Patterson, gave me a strange look. Mrs. Whitmore, she said carefully, "Are you sure you want to withdraw from this account?" It's quite low. My hands went cold. Low? What do you mean, low? She showed me the balance. £300. We'd had nearly £5,000 in that account just 3 months prior. When I confronted Thomas that evening, he laughed it off. "Oh, Maggie, I moved most of it to a savings account with better interest. Didn't I tell you? Must have slipped my mind. He kissed my cheek and went back to reading his newspaper. And I stood there feeling foolish for even questioning him. But the biggest sign, the one I should never have ignored, was the rule. Thomas had always been particular about his privacy. His office at home was off limits. His briefcase was never to be opened. His work clothes were to be hung just so. But in the spring of 1979, a new rule appeared. I was never, under any circumstances, to enter St. Michael's Church outside of Sunday service. Why on earth not? I asked, laughing. I've been volunteering there for years, helping Father Benedict with the parish newsletter. Well, you need to stop, Thomas said, his voice sharp in a way I'd never heard before. Father Benedict mentioned you're getting in the way. Besides, you have enough to do at home. I felt stung, my dears. Father Benedict had never said any such thing to me, at least, not that I could recall. But Thomas was so insistent, so adamant, that I agreed. Little did I know, this was the lock keeping the door to his secret life firmly closed. The truth came crashing down on a humid afternoon in July, 5 weeks before our 13th wedding anniversary. It was a Wednesday, which meant Thomas was supposed to be in Manchester meeting with clients. Sarah was at a friend's house, James was at football practice, and Emma was having tea at her grandmother's. I had the afternoon free, a rare gift. I decided to surprise Father Benedict by dropping off the finished parish newsletter early. I'd been working on it at home, despite Thomas's strange rule, because I'd already committed to it before he'd imposed his restrictions. The church was only a 10-minute walk from our cottage, and it was such a beautiful day, the kind where the Yorkshire sun actually breaks through the clouds and makes everything golden. St. Michael's was empty when I arrived, or so I thought. The heavy oak door creaked as I pushed it open, and the familiar smell of incense and old wood enveloped me. I loved that smell, my dears. It meant community, faith, safety. How wrong I was. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing on the stone floor, heading toward Father Benedict's office at the back of the church. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a giggle, feminine, light, coming from the VEST. My heart began to pound, though I didn't know why. Something in my gut twisted, some ancient instinct warning me to turn back, to leave, to preserve my ignorance. But I didn't listen. I never listened to my instincts back then, always deferring to logic, to trust, to the belief that good things happen to good people. I pushed open the vestry door, and there they were, my husband, Thomas Whitmore, the respected accountant, the devoted father, the loving husband pressed against the wall, kissing Father Benedict Connolly with a passion I'd never seen in our 12 years of marriage. Thomas's hands were tangled in the priest's graying hair. Father Benedict's clerical collar lay discarded on a chair. And they were wearing, my God, my dears, I can still barely speak of it. They were wearing my clothes. Thomas had on my favorite green dress, the one I'd worn to Sarah's school concert. Father Benedict was in my good wool skirt and cream blouse. The newsletter slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a slap that echoed like thunder. They sprang apart. Thomas's face, his face went from flushed to white in an instant. Father Benedict began stammering, pulling at my blouse as if he could make it disappear from his body. Maggie, Thomas breathed, and in his voice I heard everything, the end of my world. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't just an affair, though, that would have been devastating enough. This was layers of deception I couldn't even comprehend. My husband was in love with our priest. My husband wore my clothes in secret. Everything had been a lie. How long? I finally whispered. Thomas straightened, and something in his expression shifted. The guilt was replaced by something harder. Relief, maybe. The relief of no longer hiding. 5 years, he said. We've been together for 5 years. 5 years. I did the mathematics in my head even as I stood there shaking. 5 years meant it had started when Emma was just 3 years old. 5 years of lies, of deception, of me playing the perfect wife while my husband lived a secret life with the man who gave us communion every Sunday. The lipstick, I said numbly, the lipstick in your pocket. That was mine, Father Benedict said quietly. And he had the decency to look ashamed, you know. My dears, there's a moment in every catastrophe when your brain tries to protect you. It offers you denial, suggests that maybe you're dreaming, that none of this is real. I stood in that vestry, surrounded by the vestments and the crosses and the holy books, and I tried to make my mind accept that offer. But reality is cruel, and it kept forcing me to see, to understand, to know. And the money? I heard myself ask. The £5,000 from our account? Thomas and Father Benedict exchanged a glance, and I saw a new truth forming. We were going to leave, Thomas admitted. Father Benedict was going to resign, and we were going to start a new life together. In London, we've been saving, planning. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. You were going to leave? What about Sarah, James, and Emma? What about me? I was going to tell you, Thomas said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Eventually, I needed more time to drain our accounts, to secure his future with his lover, to build his escape while I remained oblivious, playing the dutiful wife in our cottage on Willow Lane. I don't remember leaving the church. One moment I was standing in the vestry. The next I was outside on the stone steps, gulping air, trying not to vomit onto the manicured lawn where church feasts were held and children played after Sunday service. My best friend, Dorothy, found me there 20 minutes later. She was 72 years old, a widow who'd been my neighbor for a decade. And she took one look at my face and knew something terrible had happened. "What is it, love?" she asked, sitting beside me on the steps, her arthritic hands taking mine. And I told her. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in broken sobs. When I finished, Dorothy was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "We need to look at your finances today, right now." The financial devastation was worse than I could have imagined. Dorothy, who'd been a bookkeeper before her retirement, helped me gather bank statements, checkbooks, and any documents I could find in Thomas's home office, the office I'd been forbidden to enter for years. What we discovered made my blood run cold. The joint account wasn't the only account he'd emptied. There was my separate account, the one I'd been saving in for years, £3,000 I'd been putting aside for the children's education. Gone. Our building society account with another £4,000. Gone. He'd even borrowed money against our cottage, taking out a second mortgage I knew nothing about. We owed £12,000. That bastard, Dorothy said, her normally gentle voice hard as stone. "He's been systematically robbing you blind. But we found something else too, my dears. Letters, hidden in a locked drawer that Dorothy helped me pry open. Letters between Thomas and Father Benedict, dating back 6 years, full of declarations of love and detailed plans for their future together. They'd been saving in a separate account, an account funded entirely by money stolen from me, from our family, from the businesses that trusted Thomas with their finances. You need a solicitor," Dorothy said firmly, "and you need to tell someone at the church, the bishop, perhaps." I spent that night in Dorothy's sitting room, unable to face going home. The children were still out, and I couldn't bear to see them yet. Couldn't bear to think about how I would explain that their father, the man who helped with homework and attended school plays and read bedtime stories, had betrayed us all in the most fundamental way possible. The next morning, I called my cousin Henry, who was a solicitor in Leeds. When I told him everything, the long silence on the other end of the line told me just how bad it was. "Margaret," he finally said, "I'm so sorry, but you need to know this is going to get ugly, very ugly. And given the nature of, well, given the circumstances, I'm not sure how sympathetic people will be." He was more right than he knew. Within 48 hours, everyone in Millbrook knew. I never found out who told, but I suspect it was someone from the church, perhaps the cleaning lady, who'd noticed things out of place. or one of the choir members who'd seen something they shouldn't have. Small towns are like that, my dears. Secrets don't keep. But here's what I didn't expect. They blamed me. She must have driven him to it. I heard Mrs. Caldwell whisper in the post office. What kind of wife doesn't know her husband is unhappy? Poor Father Benedict, said Mrs. Morrison at the butcher shop. He was such a good man. She must have confronted them in such a terrible way, spreading these awful rumors. You see, my dears, this was 1979. People didn't talk about these things. Homosexuality had only been legal for 12 years, and in small Yorkshire towns, it might as well have still been illegal in people's minds. But instead of directing their shock and disapproval at Thomas and Father Benedict, they directed it at me. I became the woman who'd ruined 2 men, who'd made a scene, who couldn't keep her husband happy. Thomas moved out within the week, going to stay with Father Benedict at the rectory. The bishop was called. Investigations were launched, but it all moved so slowly, like treacle. Meanwhile, I had to face the town every day. The library let me go. We're making cuts, they said, but I knew it was because parents didn't want their children near me, as if whatever curse had befallen my marriage might be contagious. The children suffered worst of all. Sarah came home crying after school, saying the other girls had called her father a queer and said our family was disgusting. James got into a fistfight defending his father's honor, though he didn't understand what he was defending him from. Little Emma, bless her heart, just kept asking when Daddy was coming home why he didn't love us anymore. Did I do something wrong, Mummy? She asked one night, her small face wet with tears. Is that why Daddy left? I held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and lied. No, darling, you didn't do anything wrong. Daddy needs to be somewhere else right now. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her father was living a double life? That the man who kissed her goodnight and called her his princess had been lying to her every single day? You can't, my dears, you can't. So you lie, and you try to hold the pieces of their world together even as your own world crumbles to dust. The mortgage payments came due. The bills piled up. I had no income, and Thomas had taken everything. His solicitor sent papers stating he wanted a divorce, that he was entitled to half of everything. Half of everything. Half of what? The debt he'd created? The broken home he'd destroyed? By August, I had nothing. No job, no money, a home I was about to lose, and 3 children depending on me. I was 35 years old, and my life was over, or so I thought. On a Tuesday morning in September, I woke up and made a decision. I was not going to let Thomas Whitmore destroy us. I was not going to let this town's judgment define my children's future. I was going to survive. I started by taking in washing. I'd always been good with laundry, particular about stains, careful with fabrics. I printed flyers on the library's photocopier before they sacked me and posted them in shop windows. Quality laundry service, competitive rates. Some people tore them down, but some people didn't. Mrs. Patterson from the bank was my first customer. She brought 2 loads of washing and paid me £5. I don't care what people say, she told me. You were always kind to me, and that's what matters. Then I started baking. My grandmother had taught me to make traditional Yorkshire pudding, gingerbread that was dark and sticky and perfect with a cup of tea. I made batches and batches, wrapping them in waxed paper, and convinced the owner of the corner shop to sell them on commission. They sold out the first day. I added treacle toffee, lemon drizzle cake, and my special butter shortbread. Soon, people from neighboring towns were coming specifically for Margaret's sweets. They didn't care about the scandal. They cared that my parkin was the best they'd ever tasted. But it was brutal work, my dears, brutal. I'd wake at 4 in the morning to start baking, work until 7 to get the children ready for school, then spend the day washing other people's clothes, hanging them on lines in our small garden, ironing until my arms ached. My hands, which had once been soft from library work, became red and rough, the skin cracking around my nails. I'd find myself crying while I scrubbed stubborn stains from someone's tablecloth, tears mixing with the suds. I started tutoring in the evenings mathematics and English for students whose parents could look past the scandal. I had to do it secretly, the children coming to the back door so their parents wouldn't be seen at the front, as if I was something shameful. But I didn't care. I charged £2 an hour, and every pound went into a jar hidden in the kitchen. The physical toll was immense. I lost to stone in 3 months, my clothes hanging off me like I was made of wire. I developed a cough from the steam and the chemicals from the washing. At night, I'd collapse into bed, too exhausted to even cry anymore. But slowly, so slowly, things began to change. The women who gossiped about me started bringing their washing. They couldn't deny that I did it better and cheaper than anyone else. The corner shop owner asked if I could make cakes for special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries. I said yes. I always said yes. By Christmas of 1979, I was making enough to cover the mortgage payments, barely. I still had to clean houses twice a week, scrubbing toilets and mopping floors for women who'd once been my friends, women who now spoke to me like I was the help, which, I suppose, I was. One of those women was Mrs. Thornberry, the mayor's wife. She was particularly cruel, always pointing out spots I'd missed. making me re-clean things that were already spotless. "Is this how you kept your house?" she'd say. "No wonder your husband left." I'd bite my tongue, take her money, and leave. But inside, I was keeping a tally of every humiliation, storing them away as fuel for the fire that was growing inside me. The turning point came on a Sunday morning in March of 1980. I'd stopped going to St. Michael's. I couldn't bear to step foot in that church again. Father Benedict had been quietly transferred to another parish after the bishop's investigation, and a new priest, Father Michael, had taken over. People said he was kind, progressive, nothing like Benedict, but I'd found God in my own way, through my work, through my survival. I didn't need a church building to know I was strong. That Sunday, though, Sarah begged me to go to the church's spring fete. She'd been working so hard at school, trying to overcome the stigma of our family, and she wanted to enter her painting in the youth art competition. So I went, my dears. I walked through those church gates with my head high, Sarah's hand in mine. Mrs. Thornberry was there, of course, holding court with the church ladies. When she saw me, her face twisted into something ugly. Loud enough for everyone to hear, she announced, "Well, well, look who's here. I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face, Margaret. Hasn't your family caused enough scandal?" The fete went silent. Everyone turned to stare. Sarah's hand tightened in mine, and I could feel her trembling. 14 years old and being humiliated because of her mother's presence. I opened my mouth, though I had no idea what I was going to say. But before I could speak, a voice rang out across the churchyard. "That's quite enough, Beatrice." It was Mrs. Agnes Hartley, 91 years old, the town's eldest resident, a woman who'd lived through 2 wars and the death of 3 husbands. She walked toward us slowly, leaning on her cane, and the crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. "Margaret Whitmore," she said, stopping in front of me, "has shown more courage and grace in the past year than most of us show in a lifetime. While you lot were gossiping and judging, she's been raising 3 children alone, building a business from nothing, and surviving what would have broken lesser women. I've eaten her parking. I've seen her work. And I'll tell you something, she's got more character in her little finger than you do in your entire body, Beatrice Thornberry." Mrs. Thornberry's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Agnes turned to address the crowd. "Anyone who has a problem with Margaret being here can take it up with me. Otherwise, shut your mouths and let this woman and her daughter enjoy the fete." The silence that followed was different, respectful, and then, one by one, people began to nod, to murmur agreement, to turn away and give us space. Sarah won 3rd place in the art competition that day. But more importantly, something shifted in Millbrook. Agnes Hartley had given me her approval, and in a small town that mattered over the next 10 years, my business grew beyond anything I'd imagined. What started as washing and baking expanded into a proper catering business. I hired 2 other women who'd fallen on hard times, teaching them my recipes, showing them the value of good, honest work. We catered weddings, funerals, business luncheons. Margaret's kitchen became known throughout Yorkshire. I never forgot where I came from, my dears. Never forgot the feeling of scrubbing toilets while people looked down on me. So I hired women others wouldn't. Divorcees, single mothers, women who'd made mistakes. I gave them fair wages and treated them with dignity. The children thrived, despite everything. Sarah won a scholarship to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh. She's a GP now, with 3 children of her own, and she tells her patients that her mother taught her the meaning of resilience. James studied law at Cambridge, determined to fight injustice after watching what his father had done to us. He works for a charity now, helping people navigate difficult divorces and financial abuse. Emma became a teacher, working with underprivileged children in Manchester. She says she remembers what it felt like to be looked down on, and she never wants any child to feel that way. By 1990, I'd paid off every penny of the debt Thomas had created. I owned the cottage outright. I'd expanded the business into a small cafe on High Street, yes. The same High Street where people had once whispered about me. I employed 15 people. I won the Yorkshire Women in Business Award in 1909 to dot as for Thomas. I heard bits and pieces over the years. He and Father Benedict moved to London, just as they'd planned. But their relationship didn't survive the reality of living openly. Thomas tried to start a new accounting business, but was struck off for misappropriating client funds. Last I heard, he was working as a bookkeeper for a small firm in Brighton, alone. His charm and his lies finally catching up to him. Father Benedict left the priesthood entirely. I have no idea what became of him. Do I hate them? You know, my dears, I used to. I used to hate them with a burning intensity that frightened me. But hate is exhausting, and I had too much else to do. Now I just feel sad for the time wasted, for the lies, for the children who suffered, but also grateful in a strange way, because their betrayal forced me to discover who I really was. Not Thomas Whitmore's wife, not a quiet librarian, but Margaret, a woman who could survive anything. I'm 76 now, sitting in the conservatory of the cottage I almost lost, watching my grandchildren play in the garden, where I once hung endless loads of washing. My hands are still rough, the calluses permanent reminders of those hard years, but they're capable hands, strong hands, Hands that built something from nothing last month. The town council asked if they could name the new community center after me, the Margaret Whitmore Center for Women's Empowerment. Me, the woman they'd once treated like a pariah. I accepted, on the condition that we offer free business skills classes for women in difficult circumstances. Agnes Hartley died in 1995 at the age of 106 at her funeral. I learned that she'd been helping to pay for Sarah's medical school the whole time, sending anonymous donations through her solicitor. She'd told her grandson, who told me after she passed. She said, he explained that you reminded her of herself, and she wanted to make sure your daughter had every chance in the world. I think about that sometimes, my dears, about how one person's kindness, one moment of courage, can change everything. About how the people who hurt us don't get to write the ending to our stories. We write those ourselves, one hard day at a time. If I've learned anything in my 76 years, it's this. Betrayal reveals who people really are, both the betrayers and the betrayed. You have two choices when life breaks you open. You can let the broken pieces cut you to ribbons, or you can use them to build something new, something stronger, something entirely your own. I chose to build, and what I built was a life I never could have imagined in that vestry, standing frozen while my world collapsed. A life where my children are thriving, where I employ good people doing honest work, where my grandchildren call me every week and say, "Tell us again, Grandma, about how brave you were." Was I brave? I don't know. I was desperate. I was furious. I was heartbroken. But maybe that's what bravery really is doing, what needs to be done, even when you're falling apart inside. So to anyone listening who's facing their own moment of devastation, their own discovery in the vestry, I want you to know it doesn't end there. The pain doesn't end quickly, I won't lie to you about that. But it does end, and what comes after can be bigger and better and more authentically yours than anything that came before. You are not what was done to you. You are what you do next. Thank you for listening to me today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories. Share with someone who might be needing a little hope. Where are you watching from? Leave it in the comments.